Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. Dick and I are really honored to have with us today Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Now, many of you won't remember him because maybe you're too young, but those of you that are my age or around my age or a little older will remember that he served as Chief of Staff to Colin Powell when Colin Powell was Secretary of State, and he and Colin Powell actually go way back. Before that, he served for 31 years in the U.S. Army, serving on the faculty of the U.S. Naval War College. He was a special assistant to General Powell and director of the U.S. Marine Corps War College at Quantico, Virginia, and is now a leading commentator and critic of military and political affairs. Welcome, Colonel Wilkerson. I can't just call you Larry.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah, excellent. We're so glad you're sitting still for us, Colonel. Trump is already sending regular active duty soldiers and Marines to our southern border, with many more likely to come. Is this even legal, and what is the danger?
As I understand the law, and I'm not an expert in this domestic area, but I did have to deal with it to a certain extent when Powell was chairman. You may recall that we had the LA riots during that time, 1992, Rodney King and that whole affair. And it was a very, very traumatic moment when Powell found out what the president, H.W. Bush, was going to issue as an order to the general who was in charge of the U.S. military response to the LA riots. Powell went right to the White House and he sat down with H.W. Bush and he talked to him for a long time about race relations in the United States, and Bush changed the whole order. And the order went out, don't kill anybody, instead of use force as you see fit. I mean,
Oh,
it was a more dramatic change than that. But even the general who was in charge recently was interviewed. He's older now, of course, but he was interviewed and he talked about how he made sure that that was imbued in every Marine and every soldier's mind, that they weren't supposed to be shooting people. So that kind of moment doesn't exist anymore, which is the reason I cite it. There's no one in the hierarchy of leadership right now who understands even vaguely what Colin Powell meant about leadership, particularly leadership of the U.S. military. But we had to look at domestic issues at that time, and I had to look at it fairly closely. And as best as I can tell, Trump is doing it under an archaic piece of legislation called the Insurrection Act, which goes way back, and which more or less, if you interpret it the way George W. Bush interpreted it, the way Dick Cheney interpreted it, and apparently the way Donald Trump is interpreting, gives the president carte blanche domestically. He can do anything he wants to. All he's got to do is say, I think that's a problem, and dispatch the military. Now, it should be up to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the other chiefs of services to advise the president when he's really making a mistake in this regard. And I don't know what's happened. I was watching C.Q. Brown, who's the black chairman of the Joint Chiefs right now.
Right.
I'm happy to see that he's survived so far, because you may not know this, but a lot of the executive order type things going out right now in the military and elsewhere are very oriented toward white. They're eliminating black clubs. They're eliminating Hispanic clubs at West Point, for example.
Right.
They're almost flagrantly saying this is a white man's country. Get out of my country.
Right.
So I was watching the body language of C.Q. Brown sitting beside Pete Hegseth, the new Secretary of Defense, as they were meeting with Bibi Netanyahu yesterday, I think it was. I was watching the film today. And Hegseth is just a sycophant. He's trying to use Netanyahu's star power to reflect on himself, so he's really being a sycophant with him. And C.Q. Brown's looking at him kind of funny. And I don't blame him. And if I were Brown, I'd be worried about my tenure, because Trump doesn't seem to like colored people, as it were, people of color in positions. And he doesn't like women in positions. I'm getting emails from all over the country from women asking me what should they do, and how can they do it, and with whom can they do it, because they're being told by male commanders, go away, you're no longer going to serve in a combat position. You're no longer going to fly that fighter jet off of that carrier. You're not going to go to Top Gun school like you were ordered to do a week ago. I'm pulling your orders. And they don't know what to do. Well, they're going to destroy the U.S. military if they keep doing that, because women now are a good quarter of the ranks. And you do this sort of thing, you're not only going to force them out, officer or enlisted woman, they're going to force them out early or on time, and they're not going to come back, re-enlist, in other words. And you're going to stop the accession. You're going to stop the recruitment. Because women won't come in if they know they're going to be treated like that. So this is a very dangerous time for the armed forces of the United States. And I'm going to be interested in seeing how many people at the top stand up and are accounted for in this.
So, Colonel Wilkerson, you mentioned the powers of the president. People who banter around words like the Posse Comitatus Act, what should they think? I mean, is that act meaningless?
It's only meaningful if the people executing it or not executing it think it's meaningful. I found that out big time too in George H.W. Bush's administration. George W. Bush, his son, Bush II, as we called him, we called him other names too that weren't didn't seem to care that much about domestic rules and domestic law. Look at the Patriot Act. I mean, that thing was a debacle. It was a usurpation of constitutionally guaranteed rights of American citizens. But we went right ahead and did it. And incidentally, we are still doing it. And to my eternal shame, because I cried crocodile tears too when Barack Obama was elected, and I helped campaign for him right after I left the Bush administration. I helped campaign for him. He continued it. He did not stop it. He continued it, especially things that were more secretive, like the national security letters that put in people's files that damn them for the rest of their lives, because they've done this or done that. A violation of somebody's wishes that wasn't really a violation, and certainly wasn't constitutional to do something reprehensible against them. But we did it. NSA is still listening to you and still listening to me. They're probably listening to this broadcast.
Most likely.
And there is no reason or rationale for them to be doing that now to the depth and breadth that they're doing it. But once you give them power, it's very hard to retract it. It's very hard to bring it back. So we've got a situation now, and back to the original question you asked, where we have a warning order out to the 10th Mountain Division, the entire division, out to a brigade in the 4th Mech in Colorado, and a brigade in the division, the 82nd Airborne Division, the nation's ready division, at now Camp Liberty, used to be Fort Bragg or Fort Liberty. This is about 23,000 troops, probably, with support overhead. Your husband will know about this. It used to be called Corps support or Army support, but they take other things with them. So we're talking maybe 23,000 troops. A division, that's roughly a division, a large division. That's about 20 kilometers in a good piece of terrain that you can cover. The border's 1,350 kilometers, or I'm sorry, 3,050 kilometers. 3,050 kilometers. It's got 18 miles of sea at one end in the Pacific and 13 miles of sea at the other end in the Gulf of Mexico. It's got the Rio Grande, of course, and it's got the Colorado in Arizona as part of the border. You couldn't possibly secure the border. His orders to Northern Command were to secure the southern border. It would take the entire United States Army, entire United States Marine Corps, and a couple of states worth of people to secure the entire border. Now they can fly helicopters and do reconnaissance, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and such, and give them extended range, but you're not going to secure the borders. You're not. And now they're talking about using military power in Mexico against the cartels. You think you want an enemy that is absolutely ruthless and will take you on in a heartbeat? Go after the Mexican cartels. They're talking about sending U.S. firepower, maybe even troops on the ground into Mexico. Oh, did you ask the president of Mexico to take on the cartels? I hope all of this is just hyperbole, exaggeration, propaganda, whatever. And we're not really thinking about doing this. But if we are, our military is going to be in deep trouble.
So, in addition to invading Mexico, we're also hot off the presses. Trump surprised his staff and the world by saying that America, United States, ought to take ownership of Gaza and move 2 million people someplace else, uh, including sending, he initially said sending troops, American troops there. Uh, could anything go wrong with that?
Everything. I did watch Secretary Rubio just a moment ago, and Secretary Rubio put a much better spin on it. What he said, he just disregarded all the comments about boots on the ground, about moving the Gazans, the Palestinians. He said the United States just made a wonderful offer to rebuild Gaza. It's going to cost billions. It's going to take a lot of work. And the president just made a promise to do that. Well, if that's all it is, then Rubio just turned it into a positive rather than a negative. But to your point, it would be a disaster if we put U.S. forces on the ground over there. Absolute disaster, because as Powell said after the first Gulf War, not a single solitary boot should be on the ground in the Levant, because all it would be is a disturbance of the status quo. And that disturbance would put a bullseye on the back of every American troop, and every terrorist in the region, and maybe some who aren't terrorists would be after them, trying to kill them. So you notice we have put a lot of military power in the Levant, a lot of military power in the Middle East, but it's naval, the Fifth Fleet, the largest fleet in our inventory now. It's Marines, and they're at sea, amphibious ready groups and Marine expeditionary units, and it's air at Al Udeid and the King Khalif airfields, the two biggest U.S. airfields in the world, one in Qatar and one in Saudi Arabia. So it's power that's hidden, if you will. It's not power that walks around with a rifle and patrols and is in the terrain of harm. You put American soldiers in Gaza, you probably have half of them deserting, because they're not going to do the things that Bibi's been doing. They will not do that. Oh, there are a few that would act that way, but basically the American Army's not going to do that sort of thing. And if you put them there as occupiers and people who are cleaning up the area, so to speak, and helping secure the area while it's being cleaned up, you're ultimately going to come in contact with the settlers. So you're going to have American soldiers and settlers fighting each other. The settlers are ruthless. You'd think the IDF is ruthless. The settlers are utterly ruthless. They will shoot you between the eyes and take your meal off your table. So you just don't want to get into that.
So what do we do instead? I mean, Rubio's comment. I mean, if actually we rebuilt Gaza for the Gazans, but that'll never happen.
You're right.
So what role should America play in Israel and Palestine and Gaza?
You're not going to get any American president to do this, but ideally, what we should do is cut our ties with a country that has become a strategic liability rather than a strategic asset, and has been so since the end of the Cold War. Right. Israel served a purpose, a strategic purpose during the Cold War, because we didn't really have, other than the Shah when he was there and then he collapsed, we really didn't have a place to land, so to speak, if the Soviets made a move on the southern part of the Levant, particularly the ports at the end of Bandar Abbas and Chabahar at the end of the Persian Gulf, which Russia, as an empire, back when Catherine and Alexander and others were ruling them, coveted greatly. They fought the British for 100 years trying to make their way down to a warm water port at the end of the Persian Gulf. And the British, of course, with their empire, they managed to stop them most of the time. That's changed a little bit, but it's still an incentive. But Israel is no longer a real asset in blocking that incentive. And I don't think, frankly, that with the relationship Russia has now with Iran, they could probably say, we would like to use Chabahar, we'd like to use Bandar Abbas or some other port, and the Iranians would say, come on, come all, go ahead, do it, given the situation now with Syria having collapsed. So I don't think that's a problem anymore. So they're a liability. They're a liability for us. But here's the secret to what's happening today, in my view. Put a lot of study into this. Geopolitically, geostrategically, big terms, it means that globally, power is reversing itself from the last 2,000 years and the last 1,000 years in which Ferdinand and Isabella sent their people out and, we raped and pillaged the New World and we got very rich. And the British spawned us and we got even richer and we got more powerful. Well, that power now is slipping back. And the magnet for that slippage is China and all the powers that China is building up around itself. It's mainly economic, financial, trade, commerce power. And we don't like that at all. We're losing our hegemony. We're even losing it over Europe, which is why we have the Ukraine war. We're using Ukraine to try and reestablish our hegemony over principally the Germans, but others in Europe too. And it's not working very well at all. In fact, it's falling apart even as I speak. But this inexorable shift of power, we oppose greatly when we should be accommodating it. And we should be working with the Chinese and the Russians to collaborate, cooperate, and meet the challenges that we all have, climate change and nuclear weapons. If we don't, we're going to destroy ourselves. With either one of these, we're going to destroy ourselves. But we are fighting that. We're fighting that. And Israel has become a handy pawn in fighting this. What are they doing right now in Syria? They're moving into Syria. They may come into contact with the Turks in a very violent fashion because the Turks don't like what they're doing. They've now stepped over the Golan Heights on the Syrian side and are occupying the entire Golan Heights region all the way down to the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. And they're moving outside that. They're taking the water and they're taking the land. That's not going to be tolerated by the Turks much longer. So we're looking at the potential for a clash there. Then they really become a liability because we definitely don't want to go to war with the NATO member, Turkey. But
Right.
That's what we're looking at if Israel keeps moving the way they're moving right now into Syria, slowly but surely, further and further into Syria. And we've got the problem that they've lost. They have lost against Hamas. They have been defeated. The IDF has been defeated. They have not only not reestablished deterrence in their sense, as Hegseth was saying they had at this press conference with Netanyahu, but they've been defeated. They've been stalemated on the other front with Hezbollah. The only reason they haven't been defeated on that front is because you had Syria collapse and the line of supply to Iran was cut. But excuse me, they have been checkmated there. So we're looking at a situation where at any moment, Netanyahu not only could go, but the Israeli government could collapse, fall apart, and fight amongst itself, which it inevitably will do, and try to figure out what to do to preserve what little bit of deterrence it has left. Once the states around Israel, not just Iran, but even Saudi Arabia, once they smell blood, Israel's in trouble, big trouble. And the empire is not going to come save them. I just don't think we are, because as I was letting you know from that New Yorker article with those questions, our military is in sad shape right now. We've virtually just whipped it to death. And, we spend $1 trillion almost a year on it, but that money doesn't go to the purposes it should go. It goes to making contractors rich,
Right.
And others.
That's right. That's exactly right. So before we started this conversation, before we started recording, you mentioned to me that I'm not a normal person, and in that I really care and I try to do things to inform people. And I think there are a lot of people like me. I am completely a peacenik. I believe in collaboration and coordinating. But in this, what you call a treatyless world, a world that increasingly more and more countries have nuclear power, what can a person like me do aside from ask people to subscribe and share? I thought one thing you told me was that George W. Bush intended, before Colin Powell had a talk with him about the civil unrest in Los Angeles in 1992, that his intent was to let the military kill people, kill the black people who were rioting.
Well, the rules of engagement were going to be very, very loose. And the primary factor would be to protect your people, protect your troops. What Powell talked Bush into doing was flipping that around. Only at the last resort would you use lethal force. And you better have a real good reason for having used lethal force.
And thank God that Colin Powell was who he was. By the way, he went to high school with my father, Morris High School in the Bronx, which our readers and listeners know I'm from the Bronx. But let's talk a little bit about nuclear weapons. Right now, we have 5 countries that have nuclear weapons, and another
Nine.
3 countries.
9 countries.
Right, right. Well, another 3 and Israel. Another. What can average people do?
I think we need a movement in this country that is as powerful as the Vietnam War movement was, motivated to a large extent by the draft. We don't have one today, so we don't have that impetus today. But we need a movement in this country that, first of all, recognizes that these people are talking nonsense, and these people are around Trump now when they say we can fight and win a nuclear war. They want us to not, for example, renounce publicly and diplomatically that we will disavow first use. We keep that open as an option, first use. Think about that for a minute. What do our founding fathers think about us having this kind of technological means to destroy the world and not being willing to say we won't be the first ones to use them? That's nonsense. Even if we're lying about it, it's nonsense. It's such diplomatic stupidity to say you won't renounce first use. Russia has renounced it. China has renounced it. Okay, what's wrong with you? Well, right now, the nuclear posture statement, the way it reads, and the technological developments we're working on right now, and we've almost concluded many of them, make it possible in some people's estimation for us to strike first and win. So if you strike first, you destroy completely, or as completely as is possible, their ballistic missiles, because they'll never get out of the silos. So then you've got only their submarines, and China didn't have that many ballistic missile submarines, nor does Russia really, and their bombers to deal with. And we think our ability to shoot their bombers down is top grade too. I'm not sure it is, but we think it is. So these people are actually talking about starting a nuclear war and winning it, which really, really is insane as far as I'm concerned. We've lost all that body of knowledge we gained during the Cold War. Almost realistically lost it. In other words, the people have died. People like Dan Ellsberg and others, they're gone. And this young group coming up, especially the ones who are highly technical, think the Manhattan Project times 10, they're all dependent on the nuclear industry for their jobs. Their jobs are well paid, plus jobs. They don't want to leave those jobs. They're demanded by their bosses to come up with new kinds of developments every year, technological developments to make the weapons even more deadly, more accurate, more insane. So they're working away at that, and they don't remember the past because they didn't live the past. We have a whole new nuclear industry out there that's dependent on this industry for its livelihood, and no one to talk about the things we're talking about right here now. I'm 80 years old, so I remember the Cold War vividly. I remember when we built fallout shelters in our backyard. LBJ signed a pamphlet. I used to show it to my students at William & Mary. Signed by the President of the United States, and the pamphlet details how to build bomb shelters, how to put survival kits in your basement, and all this sort of stuff. We took it seriously. We're not taking it seriously anymore. And so, as a consequence, we've had presidents who destroyed all the nuclear weapons treaties, from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty all the way up through the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, all the way through, I think probably this New START process is all we have left And I think Vladimir Putin thinks we're so disingenuous and duplicitous now that he's not going to renew that one. So then we're looking at the world with the weapons it has with no treaties at all.
So I remember in sixth grade or so, looking out our back window with my dad, who, like you, was a longtime military guy, and him asking, do you think we could put a bomb shelter back there? And the rest of us just looked like, really?
My most vivid memory of it is when I was a fifth grader at Central Elementary School in Gaffney, South Carolina. And we did a drill down in the basement, and we had to put our heads between our knees.
Right,
And
right, right.
I peeked out of the corner of my eye and I saw this nuclear symbol beside me on a pasteboard box. And I later asked my teacher, what was that? She said, oh, that's all the supplies. That's water and mask and all it.
But
But
you,
it was
but you,
it
but
was
you
real.
mentioned China, and it seems like in every realm, in technology, in foreign policy, in economics, and in forming relationships, China's got a step on us in recent years in every regard. In Africa, they have their Belt and Road project. They go around and build bridges and schools and roads and build friendships and build allegiances. And meanwhile, I don't know, we have several hundred military bases sprinkled around in every country designed to control. And it seems like our strategy is losing, and it seems like people in government and in the military can see this, but are they so beholden to the military industrial complex that they're going to go for it anyway?
There's a lot of truth in that. Um, it's like the nuclear industry I was describing. The bureaucracy that surrounds it and the jobs that are embedded in it and the money that comes from it is supporting a lot of people. And even though they might have a thought or two from time to time that this is not good, that they shouldn't be involved in this, I remember a vivid scene from, I don't know if you ever saw the movie by Eugene Jarecki, Why We Fight. It's a great movie. This woman is making bombs at one of our, it's closed now, but one of our arsenals in Indiana, as I recall. She's making bombs and they're going down the line. And he's interviewing her and she says, I really would like to be making toys or something like that. I really wouldn't like to be making these bombs, but I've got a job and I get paid well.
Right.
And she passes the next bomb down, So that's all it takes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where we are. I mean, we live in Southern California, and there are big military contractor type jobs that supply employment to a large, broad cross section of people that live in Los Angeles. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Now, when you sent us the topics of conversation that you'd like to engage in, you mentioned the role that the billionaire class can play in injecting themselves into the military industrial complex. You want to talk a little bit about AI and the tech bros and how they might play a role?
The most disconcerting and I think probably dangerous ultimately. I'm not saying that it's not perhaps necessary if you move slowly and methodically to examine the technology for military purposes. But what's happening under Trump and what was happening under Biden to a certain extent too is Silicon Valley's trying to capture the very lucrative contracts that go to the Pentagon. And they see the best way to do that, obviously, is their technological expertise. Things like artificial intelligence applied to military operations, robotics applied to military operations. They see price tags. They see great big cash registers tricking up dollars for them. And the military it's not always the most circumspect organization when it comes to enhancing their ability to kill. Uh, One admiral put it this way: the only reason I'm interested in working for the chief of naval operations on climate change is because I understand climate change is going to cause my operational capacity to be diminished. Therefore, I want to help stop the things that are happening so my operational capacity won't be diminished. Well, what he means by operational capacity is killing people.
Right.
But I'll take any port in a storm. If he's going to work on it when the rest of the federal bureaucracy isn't, fine. Just don't let him get it too out of hand. The same thing with AI and robotics and these other technologies. And look at what's happening in Central Africa now. It has not been as bad in Central Africa right now, relatively speaking, since Leopold was murdering people just for the pleasure of murdering people, Brussels and Belgium. They're doing it for critical minerals. And the critical minerals are not just those in our cell phones that they sell and get incredible prices for. They're the ones that the military uses. The military is really dependent on critical minerals right now. And it's a wide range. Most of the names you wouldn't even recognize. I don't recognize them. China's got a lock. I was on a webinar the other day from the Naval War College, and it was on critical minerals, and I didn't realize this, but two of the most critical, China has a 95% and a 97% lock on. In other words, China has all the contracts wrapped up for these minerals. One of them, the one that's 95% China monopoly, about 50% of the critical minerals themselves actually occur in China. So they've got a heck of an in there. Not that that's necessarily dangerous, but it just shows you how ill distributed perhaps these things are across the earth. And there are people who feel like Lindsey Graham, for example, he said it on the floor of the Senate, you got to go kill some people to get these things. Mm-hmm. He even said, don't you people understand why we're fighting in Ukraine? We want those critical minerals.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Lindsey Graham has always struck me as one of those guys. I remember him from Vietnam, who's more than happy to send somebody else's kids to go die for him.
Yes. Yes. We used to talk about that a lot in my seminars. I put my whole national security affairs class around a question. And the question was put this way. We called it, we defined fateful decisions. Fateful decisions were decisions a president made to send young men and women to die for state purposes and to kill others for state purposes. And then we framed it in Harry Truman's time and then Nixon's time and Kennedy, all the way through the presidents post-World War II. And we looked at the key fateful decisions, everything from Korea to Libya for Obama. And my students would wind up after 14 3-hour seminars understanding that their country was killing a lot of people in the world. And by God, they didn't know exactly why.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it got worse as we moved through the post-World War II period. Couldn't figure out Libya. Just couldn't figure out Libya. And neither could President Obama. I met with President Obama in the Roosevelt room in the November of his last second term. And the first words out of his mouth, he had just experienced Hillary Clinton, Samantha Power, and others putting him into Libya. His first words were, quote, "There's a bias in this town toward war." I put that at the head of my syllabus.
Right.
Right. President Obama, November 2000, whatever it was, 7 or 8 or somewhere in there. No, it must have been 2015. That's what he said. And John Kerry, as Secretary of State, was sitting right beside him, and Kerry looked like a deer caught in the headlights. My president just said that.
And it wouldn't surprise me if John Kerry was aware of that for far longer than President Obama.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And when Obama went on, kind of saying he didn't know what to do about it, the general who was with me, we went out in the West Wing and we looked at each other and we said, was he talking to us, to his Secretary of State, or to himself?
To himself.
And Paul said all three.
Yeah. I mean, he was born in the 60s.
Yeah.
Right. And John Kerry was out there in Vietnam with the swift boat veteran whole thing.
So, and at that time, the general and I reminded ourselves that Kerry had just been advocating for ground forces on the ground, troops on the ground in Syria. And so Obama was using that occasion to tell his Secretary of State, shut up.
Well, Colonel Wilkerson, it's been really enlightening talking to you I hope that we can do this again, because you just are such a reservoir of knowledge, especially now that you've taken the position that you've taken, that we really need more collaboration. Living in this treaty-less world where so many countries have nuclear capabilities, we have to talk to each other, and we've got to get the rest of the people engaged. You know, I was looking at a series on HBO, I think it's no Netflix, about Vietnam. And I looked at all of the people who were harmed in Vietnam. And most of those people were not politically active. They were farmers and moms and dads. And we've got to take the reins of the country, because we're going to be the ones that pay the price.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Benjamin Franklin said something at the end of the Constitutional Convention when a woman walked up to him supposedly and asked him, "What happened? What'd you do?" And he said, "We created a republic if you can keep it."
Right.
That's right.
Well, this has been a delight, sir. We're so glad you'd sit still for us. And as Sharon said, we're going to try to call on you again when we can.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for all the work you do out there.
Is there any place that you'd like our readers to check? Is there a website or an organization that you're involved in where they can learn more?
Yeah, the Eisenhower Media Network.
We're on it.
Yeah, you just Google Eisenhower Media Network and it'll come right up.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below, and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.